Welcome to Gig Impressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu Veth, and he is back, fresh into fatherhood. Stefan Bienkowski, congrats. How's it going? How's the little one? Hope everything went well.
Yeah, everything went well. Mother and baby are doing very well. We had a little boy called Joshua last Sunday on Mother's Day in the UK, which was nice for Heather, my wife. Yeah, it's been crazy. I now have this little bundle of meat that I adore with all my heart, and in return, it pisses and vomits on me every day. It's a fascinating little wrinkle to my life now. But yeah, we're doing well. We're still kind of, dealing with the nocturnal nature of him at the moment. But we're taking every day as it comes. I'm still technically on paternity leave as well, so but no, everyone's doing very, very well, and we're obviously over the moon. But yeah, ask me in a couple of weeks, and I'll tell you if we've got any better or if I just want to claw my eyes out.
Yeah, I call this the shell shocked phase.
Yeah, I mean, at one point last night, I think it must have been like 2 in the morning. We couldn't get him to sleep, and I just looked at my wife with a big smile on my face, and I said, "I'm dead inside," and like she just burst out laughing. Um, so like, it's just that kind of, as you know, it's just kind of, it's so ridiculous. You just kind of end up laughing at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's crazy. But no, he's doing very, very well. He's a lovely little boy. When he's either sleeping or not crying, he's angelic. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. But also a big thank you to everyone who said congratulations. I did post on social media, and so many of our followers and listeners and stuff got in touch, and a really lovely thank you. So many lovely messages as well. There's so many, like, obviously most of my followers are like guys who watch football, and so many of them just got back to me and like lovely messages about how much they love being dads and how it's a wonderful thing. And I mean, obviously that's what you would say, but it's also just a nice thing for people to say, like to have a conversation about social media where the world seems to be burning around us, but we had this little cohort of people talking about how much they love being dads. So that was nice.
It is. I mean, I'm 4 months in, and it is actually really nice. I can only highly recommend it. The first 3 weeks are a lot. They are a lot. Don't tell let anyone else tell you otherwise. If they tell you it's easy, it's a lie. But it does actually get easier. It's my experience, and it actually is really nice. And we went out for I'm on a vacation in Palm Desert for the week, and we went out for a nice walk this morning. And like wherever you go, people just stop and they want to see your baby, and it breaks the ice. And in a world where like everything just seems to be negative right now, it like provides a really positive thing. So yeah, I love being a dad, Stefan, and you're gonna love it too.
Such a lovely positive way to start the show. So
Right?
now we should just bullshit everyone's favorite teams in the Bundesliga and bring things
Yeah.
back down to level.
I mean, like, yeah. So what we're gonna do is we're essentially gonna treat this a little bit of the Champions League preview show. Both Bayern and Dortmund were really big games this week, right? So we're gonna recap their respective games and see how it goes from there. But like that is the big focus. And you're quite right. We're going from very positive to actually both these teams are in trouble with injuries mostly. And I think we should probably start with Bayern. They had the Friday game against Augsburg. And that game was probably more complicated than they wanted it to be. Ultimately, it got decided because of some second yellow card, right? That
Hmm.
foul on Kane, and lots of talk back and forward about that particular situation. Yellow cards are not reviewable, so it is what it is. Have to add to that, like I think just moments later, Kane was brought down in the box and the referee didn't give that. And you and I basically agreed that if there's ever been a makeup call in the Bundesliga, that's it. Where the referee like tries to balance out one bad decision with yet another bad decision. I personally hate that, but they do it. Um, but it did take that sending off, in my opinion, for Bayern to really to see off Augsburg. And that is probably the most positive thing about this game was the result. They really have to grind out results at the moment because the injury list is just so long. The entire backline is out injured, right? They added Ito to the injury list last week. And then of course in the second half, Jamal Musiala had to come off with what looked at first just a hamstring injury, and you can see it when when that shot happens, when he goes down, and a couple other Bayern players walk up to him, and you can see him say like touching the
Mm.
back of his leg, and he says hamstring, right? Like right away, he knew. Unfortunately, hamstrings come in different categories, and then he had to be helped off the field. And I think we all said like, look, that's probably a tear. And I think it's been confirmed now, right? 8 weeks for him. To which I said, wow, like that's not that long. And then you said, well, that's to the end of the season, which it is. I mean, it is. That's
Yeah.
June 7th. If we go from today, and that is the end of the season. That is past the Champions League final. Like his season is over, Stefan.
Yeah, his season is over, and it's a real shame for Musiala, because obviously Bayern are still in the Champions League. They're still pushing for the
Yeah.
Bundesliga. They're still technically, leading that. If you still want to call it a race, we'll maybe get onto Leverkusen if we have time into the show. But yeah, it's a race that both these teams seem to be kind of stumbling towards the finish line.
Yeah.
Um, and Musiala was crucial in this game. Obviously, we talked about. You said, it was a game where they had to kind of really just kind of go over the line, and I completely agree with you. It wasn't classic Bayern. It wasn't exciting for Bayern fans. In fact, it was probably a nightmare due to the fact that Musiala went off with an injury. But it was a good win, I think, for Bayern. It was a game where I actually found myself quite impressed with them by the end of the match, just
Mhm.
because things weren't really going their way. They had a number of injuries. Musiala then goes out halfway through the match, which obviously is a huge blow because he's literally missing. But even just kind of the emotional blow of seeing your best player walk off the pitch like that
Yeah.
seeps into the team as a whole. And yeah, you're right. You could tell from the get go that there was something wrong because he actually went down like in the Augsburg box, and then Bayern actually attacked, and he still didn't get up. So you're like, he was actually like hindering his
Mhm.
own team's play. So you know it was pretty bad. Um, but no, I mean, I think it was a good game. Augsburg are absolutely no, they're no shrugs. They're a very good team right now. They then obviously go ahead through a goal from Giannalis, a fantastic goal, I thought, where he really turned Konrad Leimer inside out. He scores a half hour at the half hour mark, and at that point, it looked like a game where Augsburg actually had the measure of this Bayern team. But
Mhm.
Musiala being Musiala, he picks up a cutback from Leroy Sané just for half time, and his first shot's blocked. But then he does something that I think very few players can do, and something that Musiala's so good at is where he takes the ball again and he makes some space for himself in the box to kind of get that shot away. And you know, I guess from that point on, because he obviously then goes off like 10 minutes into the second half, and then becomes this match where you're kind of waiting to see who's going to step up for Bayern Munich in Musiala's absence. And I think that'll be the question
Mhm.
for them kind of this week, obviously against Inter Milan, but for the rest of the season, who will be the guy who's going to step into Musiala's shoes and kind of be their key player for them? Thomas Muller obviously came in, as a lifelike replacement for him in the match. We had Leroy Sané on the left hand side, who technically didn't get a goal. I think it went down to an own goal
Yeah.
with his shot, who I
Which I
thought was
disagree
okay.
with, by the way. I think that should be a Sané goal. That's just me.
Yeah, I think it technically comes down to whether it was
Mhm.
on target or not, and I guess it technically wasn't. But I know what you mean. Um, but then the problem with Leroy Sané is that, and we talked about this on our subscriber chat during the game. He has that wonderful one-on-one chance when Augsburg are pushing in the second half, and he fluffs his lines. He just hits it straight at the goalkeeper, and I could have put my mortgage on him missing that goal, and it's just something that seems to be a problem with Leroy Sané. It's something I actually mentioned on social media, like saying in some alternate future or some alternate universe, there's a scenario in which a youth coach takes a look at Leroy Sané, and instead of basically pushing him out wide because he can't finish, he actually says, no, I'm going to turn you into a striker, but you're going to spend the summer learning how to score goals. And he becomes a world-class player because he knows how to finish. And that's the kind of frustrating thing with Leroy Sané. If he could finish as well as Musiala, for example, he'd be a world-class player. I've got no doubt about it. He would
Mhm.
be Arjen Robben, he would be Frank Ribery, he'd be, whoever else, Musiala, Thomas Müller. He'd be of that pedigree, in my opinion. But he still has that thing missing in his game. But then you could also maybe, and on the opposite wing, you had Michael Olise, who actually did step up, and he obviously set up the goal for Harry Kane to score the second goal. Um, and I do kind of wonder if maybe Bayern will just kind of turn to him in Musiala's absence. He has consistently been probably their best option in attack outside of Musiala. I know Harry Kane's obviously
Hmm.
scored a bucket load of goals, but when it comes to the guy who's creating the chances, in fact, I'd probably say Olisie's probably been better than Musiala this season, to be honest, in terms of his pure numbers.
Yeah.
So going into this Inter game, I think all eyes will be on what he can do for Bayern, and how he can kind of help them through this match, which is a huge thing to even think about, considering like 8 months ago when he joined the club, there's so many question marks as to whether he can make the step up from Crystal Palace. Did Bayern spend too much
Mm.
money on a player who has, uh, dubious injury past in the Premier League? But no, Olise has gone from strength to strength, and we're now at this point at the end of his first season at Bayern where he's now arguably their most important creative player behind Musiala. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how Company tackles that Inter Milan game. But if I was a Bayern fan, I'd be hoping that they find some way to get Olise on the ball constantly.
But Olise is, I had to do a story for Forbes after the Musiala injury happened, right, on how Bayern can replace him and what it all means. And Olise is second in assists at Bayern Munich with 16. Um, he has 13 goals. That puts him a third behind Musiala, I think, across all competitions, right, in goals. Kane, of course, is first in goals. So, you know, Odyssey, in my opinion, I mean, he has been such a revelation. They signed him for what, 50 million euros from Crystal Palace. His market value has since grown to 80 million euros. He's top in, according to Transfermarkt, one of the four most valuable players in the league. Deservedly so, in my opinion, as well. Um, he's been such a great find. The problem when you talk about how is he going to he can replace the production, right? And I mean, he has been extremely productive this season. The thing is, though, he's been productive this season with Musiala on the field, so it's really hard to replace a player with a player who's already on there. You can maybe ask him to step up his production a little bit. Um, and I mean, the same will be asked of Leroy Sané, who I think is going to be extremely important as well, and who maybe can fill in that role. The player that's obviously and that was made official on Saturday, right? Thomas Müller is going to leave Bayern Munich after the Club World Cup. They extended his contract for the Club World Cup, which I think is the right move. If you decide that after the end of the season this is it to extend for the Club World Cup, to use that as sort of the testimonial makes a lot of sense. For me, the question though is, and I mean, I think he will be pressed into service now because what else are you gonna do? You don't have really another number 10 in your squad, right? So positionally, that is the right replacement for him. But does Thomas Müller have the ability for 8 more weeks to be Thomas Müller, or actually return to be Thomas Müller? Because like this is something that he's really struggled with this year. I mean, the drop off has been, and we see this sometimes. Um, with sports in particular is players are fine, and and as they get older, the level of production is usually fine until one moment it isn't anymore, right? And then it seems to fall off the cliff. Like production with older players is fine, 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 good. Sometimes like returns to a really high level, and then it just can fall off a cliff. Um, and I wonder if this is what we've been seeing with him this season. And with that in mind, like does his body and his legs have 8 weeks in them where he can replace Chama Musiala, because like he is the only player who can probably fulfill this role 1-to-1. And that's what's going to be asked of him now, because there's no other player in the squad that can play there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's going to be a huge test for Mueller. Whether he starts or not, I guess, is the real question. I have a sneaky suspicion that it might actually be someone else in that role. I actually wonder if Company might throw Leon Goretzka in that number 10 position. We've
Mm.
kind of seen him kind of play this more attacking role in certain games, and he's kind of played this kind of big lumbering number 8 who's making late runs into the box. He's almost kind of got this kind of alley oop kind of skill with Joshua Kimmich, where Kimmich kind of pulls out to the right wing, and he kind of times his cross into the box for Goretzka to get onto the end of it. Um, and I would be surprised actually if Company maybe turns to Goretzka to kind of fill in. Obviously, he doesn't have the same sort of creativity as Musiala, um, Although, having said that, when he first came through at Schalke, he was probably quite very similar to the way that Musiala is now, to be honest with you. Maybe more of a box-to-box player than Musiala, but he's certainly got the technique to create chances. You can thread a pass. He's more than happy dribbling in the final third. And he has kind of done a lot better this season when he has been kind of given these opportunities to once again prove himself. So, yeah, there are options for Bayern. None of them are quite Musiala, if you will.
Mm,
Obviously Coleman's out as well, so you're looking at that bench and there's very few options. It really is just probably comes down to Gnabry, Goretzka, or Thomas Muller, and we'll kind of have to wait and see which one it'll be. But yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with that one. But it's a huge blow to Bayern. There's no doubt about it. So I don't know.
yeah.
We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, this Inter, I made the statement on the Substack chat a few weeks ago that I kind of regret now that I think Bayern are going to beat Inter. Um, I'm not sure anymore, Stefan. They're very good. I mean, Inter is a very good team, and I think if without all the injury concerns, Bayern would probably get past them. But this is gotten so hard now. You are playing without a defense. You're playing without your number one goalkeeper. I'm a big believer, but he's learning on the fly, isn't he? These are big occasions that he now is needs to learn really quickly. And in fairness, that happened to Manuel Neuer. Manuel Neuer also had to learn on the fly with Schalke when he first broke into professional football. And remember, this was a very different Schalke side than it is today. They were really good then. And played Champions League football and all that. So that these were high pressure moments, and this is the best way for a goalkeeper to learn. But it's it's not just that he has to learn in this really difficult moment, but he has to also learn with like a back line that is essentially Kim and Kim on one Achilles and Dyer. And that is so very difficult. And so I'm actually now really worried about this Inter fixture for them because I think they're going to face a team. I think Lautaro Martinez is scheduled to be back, right? He's not playing his best season, but no, he's a really good footballer. They have Thuram, who we all know from the Bundesliga, who played for a Gladbach side where they often beat Bayern. And this team is just watching a few of these Inter games, you just think like, okay, this is a really disciplined, really good football team, and they're meeting a Bayern Munich team that is sort of limping towards the end of the season, and I think this is going to really be really tough task.
Yeah, it will be. I do wonder if Company might be tempted to kind of change his tactics ever so slightly and go with almost like a
Mm,
back three with Kim, Dyer, and maybe Stanisic. And then obviously he can play someone like Guerrero on the left wing, and then Kimmich as a right wing back if he wants, or Conrad Leimer there, I suppose, could play that role too. And that allows him to kind of shuffle the pack ever so slightly and allow someone like Leroy Sané or Michael Olise to play that kind of more central role. And they can kind of fill in for Musiala in that regard without the need to have two out and out wingers. And then you could obviously bring in Goretzka in there as well, because you're right. It's not just the fact that Bayern don't really have anyone to replace Musiala. It's the fact that they don't have anyone to replace Upamecano. They don't have anyone to replace Davies. They don't have anyone to replace Neuer, even Pavlovic. Guys like that. Like they're missing so many big players this season. And that bench against Augsburg was really there wasn't a huge amount to work with there. To be honest with you, it says quite a lot that obviously Thomas Muller is a legend at Bayern Munich, but the club have obviously deemed him no longer good enough to play for Bayern. But he was the player that Company had to turn to replace Musiala in this match. So yeah, you're right. Bayern are kind of really creaking at the sides here, and it's going to be a real test of Company's ability as a head coach to see how he gets past and beats a very good Inter Milan side.
yeah, very good Inter Milan side with a lot of former Bayern Munich players, Jan Sommer in goal, Benjamin Pavard. Yeah, it's gonna be exciting to see those two, and I'm actually looking forward to this. This is the Tuesday game. Of course, we're gonna recap it. That's the basically for the bonus shows. That's the two Champions League recap matches, and that gets us to the next game that we wanted to talk about, and it's Borussia Dortmund. Dortmund 4-1 against Freiburg. Whisper it, Stefan, but it's only 5 points to a Champions League spot, and Leipzig drop points. Sorry, Mainz drop points. Gladbach drop points. Dortmund, of course, took care of Freiburg themselves. Uh, this actually seems doable now.
Yeah, I posted on social media that meme of The Simpsons where Barney gets thrown out of the pub and then he shows up back again like a minute later. I was like, this is what Dortmund are
Yeah,
like when the Bundesliga tries its best to kick them out of the top four and they just always find a way to get back into it. Um, I thought Dortmund were great in this game. I must
yeah.
admit, I thought the first half, I thought Freiburg gave a decent account of themselves until Adeyemi obviously scored with a really good goal. But Dortmund just kind of came in, they just kind of grew into the match. At half time, I did kind of say, it's a match that maybe could you, I feel like in maybe like 3 or 4 months ago, you would have said there's a game where Dortmund were obviously a goal ahead, but they just kind of lose control of it in the second half, and then they go on and drop points, which is something they've done over and over and over again in away games. But I think they had two things in their favour. One, they're playing Freiburg, who seem to have this real mental block against Dortmund. They haven't beat Dortmund since 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And just some interesting kind of performances from the Dortmund team. There's two players that really stood out to me in this game, maybe three. I thought Adeyemi was great. I thought he was really really vibrant up front, played in a more central role, took his goal really well. A lovely bit of skill to kind of get past the defender. A lovely like a final kind of touch to set himself up to score. Um, I thought Gregor Kobel actually had a really understated, impressive performance. He made two or three really big saves, particularly in the second half, I think. And it looked like the old Gregor Kobel, where it's like at least once a game he pulls Dortmund out of the fire. He kind of saves them from that clumsy goal, which just kind of brings the whole house of cards falling in on itself. So he looked like his old self, which is really encouraging from a Dortmund point of view. But I thought Chukwuemeka was the real standout for Dortmund in this team. He's playing in that kind of central midfield role alongside Pascal Gross and kind of Julian Brandt, and he was the perfect kind of link-up player for between midfield and attack. He actually set up Bayer for a good shot in the first half. He then obviously scores his own goal. Okay, it was a huge deflection, but the fact that he's still getting into those positions to kind of hit shots was great. And then for Dortmund's third goal, it's really worth looking up on YouTube if you haven't seen the highlights, because it's a lovely bit of skill to get past like two or three players from Mainz and play a wonderful through ball. And that's just something that I think Dortmund have been missing so much this season. We talk so much about Julian Brandt. I mean, I've written about it constantly in the Substack about how he's basically been Dortmund's only attacking player, playmaking player for so many seasons now. And actually, I wrote a piece diving into why Dortmund's away form has been so bad this season. And basically, what it came down to was the fact that in away games, teams can mark Julian Brandt out of games. And then this whole Dortmund system has just kind of crumbled. Laterally, they've been able to kind of turn to Pascal Gross, and he's kind of stepped up as something of a playmaker, but not really nearly as kind of potent as Julian Brandt is at his best at times. But then we got this guy Chukwuemeka who comes in. He's got the speed and pace to dribble by opposing players, but he's also got that really impressive passing ability. And I thought the way that he kind of set up that pass for Julian Brandt to kind of set up his third goal is something that Dortmund have probably been missing since Jude Bellingham was in the team. They've been missing a guy who could just pull away from another or opposing player in the middle of the park and just thread a ball like 30 or 40 yards into the final third. Mencha has had some ability to do that, but he's not really there. Pascal Gross has been moved around the pitch, sometimes at left back, sometimes at right back, sometimes he's defensive mid. He's obviously a great passer of the ball, but he's obviously not a young player anymore. Marcel Sabitzer probably could have done it 10 years ago, but he's obviously not
Yeah.
that player anymore. And then, of course, Emery Chan is now a central defender. So it was a great performance, and I'm really intrigued to see if he can kind of nail down that spot for the end of the season, because I was reading in Kicker today that the buy option for Dortmund is 30 million euros, and if he can put on performances like that routinely, then I think that's an absolute bargain if Dortmund can get him in the summer for that amount of money.
But they gotta do it, right? If you can get Carney for that kind of money, that makes so much sense for me. I mean, there's reports just before we started doing this podcast that Bino Gittens has told, or sorry, Jamie Gittens has told the Dortmund bosses that he wants to leave. And I just had to kind of roll my eyes on that news story, because I'm like, well, the way he's been playing lately, would you really be upset if he leaves? right?
No.
He was great in the first half of the season, and he wasn't fantastic in the second half. So if you can cash in on him and keep Carney, that is, I think, something you got to do. It's a logical transaction for me because you look at this particular game, right? The way the setup was with the two up front, Demi up front, Bayer up front, and then Carney kind of behind them. Um, sure, Gurasi can also fit into the squad, but it makes he seems like more of a vital piece going forward than yet another winger, is what I'm trying to say. Especially if these reports out about Jadon Sancho potentially coming back are true. If Sancho does come back, and you know, I think that's more believable than a lot of people think. I mean, we did a show on it, and in a lot of ways, it actually does make sense. Kittens really
Mm.
is surplus material. Of course, like this whole story is like, oh, they want to have 100 million euros for him, and now they dropped the price to 60 to 70 million euros. I don't think there's a planet where anyone pays that kind of money for him, but sure, keep on dreaming, I guess. But there's certainly a planet where someone will maybe pay like 40, and then if that's enough to keep Carney, then yeah, that's a good trade. You should probably do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with Jamie Gittins is that he just plays in a position that there's so many options for Dortmund. We've talked about in recent weeks about how Maximilian Bayer has come in and kind of taken his role on the left-hand side. In this match, curiously, Sergio Garassi started on the bench, and I actually thought Adeyemi and Bayer had a really good link-up play. It was basically as a kind of old-fashioned kind of front two, and I thought the two of them worked really well with each other. And I wrote my newsletter on Leverkusen this week, but I was really tempted to do something on whether Dortmund actually look better with Girassi in this team, which is crazy to say because he's comfortably their best source of goals this season. He's done a pretty decent job at Dortmund, obviously. So it seemed a bit harsh to kind of pull at that thread. But point is, they've got these two really impressive young German players in Adeyemi and Maximilian Bayer, and they're both going from strength to strength this season. You've still got even guys like Julian Duranville, for example, who's been out with injury for much of
Yeah.
the season, but when he has played, he's done quite well. He's another winger. Julian Brandt traditionally likes to play out left. We have no idea if Kovac has plans to stick him out there. Gio Reyna's still in the team as well. And there's also that Cole Campbell, the young player at Dortmund as well. So if Jamie Gittins has kind of made these kind of demands, or I mean, it's never really demands. It's usually just a player saying to his agent, "Look, I'm not getting enough game time. Let's consider our options," and then it
Yeah.
gets out and it's like player makes transfer demand. I don't think it's really that case. I think he's probably just a bit bummed out that there are other young players in the Dortmund team who are getting ahead of him. But yeah, if this was Football Manager, you would be saying, okay, I'll sell Jamie Gittins for 40, 50 million euros, make sure I pick up Chukwuemeka. And that way I've sold a player in a position where I've got plenty of depth and I've signed a player where I desperately need more depth. And I think that would go a long way to fix a lot of Dortmund's problems next season. But yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, and we don't know what. I mean, Gittins might end up scoring a hat trick against Barcelona this week, and then that whole narrative flips on its head. But yeah, and also to be fair to Gittins, by the way, just for a moment, it's not really that he's been bad or that he's not as good as these guys. It's just that he doesn't fit into this system. He's a left-sided winger who is predominantly a goal scorer, and he's playing in a team that has a big target man. And when you have a big target man up front, you have to provide chances for him. And Gittins just doesn't really have that in his game. His shooting, I think, his dribbling and his shooting, in my opinion, are his two greatest assets. He's not known for his fantastic dribbling. He's not known for his fantastic through balls. He's a goal scorer through and through, and I'm sure he'll do really well in maybe other teams doing that. But in this Dortmund team, with his tactics, with these players, it just doesn't really quite click into gear, and that's why he's been on the bench for much of the second half of the season.
So maybe Max Eberl can spend some more of that Bayern money that he likes to spend on him this summer. Um, I mean, this is yeah. I mean, the thing is too, if I was Borussia Dortmund, this is the one thing that would make me maybe pause. He's under contract until 2028, and do you sell an asset like that when it's not at the highest point?
Hmm.
This is
Yeah,
the
but
one thing to consider.
Yeah, I mean, well, the question is like, is he going to get game time next season? That's the question.
Mm,
Dortmund have had plenty of young players who were potential world beaters and have just fizzled out. It's not really, it's not a proven thing or an inevitability that he will go on to become a great player. He's obviously had great talent, but I mean, there's another player in this team, Gio Reyna, who once upon a time also looked like a world beater. And through injury and through circumstance, he's just never really managed to tie down a first team spot on that team. So if I know Dortmund like I think I know Dortmund, then I think they'll probably sell him if the right price comes this summer. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But maybe, I mean, if we say all this, there's a good chance that Dortmund might even just turn around at the end of the season, say to Niko Kovac, yeah, we don't actually want to stick with you. So they hire someone else.
yeah,
And in 3 months' time, Dortmund have a new head coach who wants Jamie Gittins to be the key player in this team. So a lot can change at Dortmund. But and as we know, because a few weeks ago we were saying that they're going to be stuck in mid-table, and now they're potentially going to end up finishing in the top four.
I think a lot. I mean, I do think there is now a chance that they finish top four. But I think a lot will be decided this week on where this journey is going to go. And we have to see whether this was just a one-off against Freiburg, as you rightfully said, a team that they like to beat. I think, before Freiburg's last win against them, I think that was 20 years where Freiburg didn't beat them. It is, if there's a boogie team for Freiburg, Dortmund is it. They are, Dortmund do traditionally really well against them. It's just how it is. So let's just wait to see how this develops. And I also think this Champions League game against midweek against Barcelona is going to be pretty decisive. So because if they get a good result in Barcelona, even a draw or a narrow loss, and they somehow get the coals out of the fire back at home in Dortmund, which remember the game that they played earlier this season, it was pretty tight. That was a game that both sides were just going at each other. Dortmund probably played better against Barcelona than Bayern played against Barcelona, just in comparison, right? Um, and so it is not beyond this Dortmund team to somehow sneak past Barcelona. And then you're in the semi-final of the Champions League. And we've seen this last year, then anything can happen. It's the way that competition is, and it's a cup competition, right? And that gets me back to Niko Kovac, because if Niko Kovac sneaks into the top four and somehow plays with this team in Munich on May 31st, you get into, oh, I guess like Terzic left after reaching the Champions League final, so there's that theory. But you know what I mean? Like it gets really hard for Dortmund. I mean, as I reported last week, the reason why Terzic and Dortmund went separate ways is because Terzic didn't think the club was ambitious enough, right? But if Niko Kovac goes into a team meeting at the end of the season and whisper it quietly, maybe has won a title, I don't think I don't think Dortmund would be in a position where they could sack him, and Niko Kovac wouldn't be the sort of person who would say like, "Oh yeah, that was fun. I'm gonna leave now." He'd be just thankful to have a job.
Yeah, I guess the issue is can they beat Barcelona, and it's a huge point because today we were obviously found out that Schlotterbeck's out for the rest of the
Yeah,
season, and that I think is going to be the biggest hurdle for Dortmund. I think this game against Barcelona is going to be nuts because I think Dortmund just cannot defend. They obviously couldn't keep a clean sheet against Freiburg. Freiburg had some chances in this game. It's worth saying they had an XG of 1.4, which is nothing to nothing to laugh at. And it was a back line for Dortmund where, it was Emre Can in the middle of the park, Anton, who again I thought was okay, but not at all convincing. And Benzabaini was the third central defender. So you've technically got a back line there of just one central defender among your three among your three central positions. And it's going to be a huge question mark for Dortmund how they kind of deal with that going forward. I reckon we'll probably see a similar system maybe, where obviously Pascal Gross can sit in front of that back line and he can kind of drop deep if we want, if necessary. And then they also had Svensson and Rierson as wing backs. So it's a back line that can very quickly become almost like a back six if need be, which they'll probably need to keep tabs on all of Barcelona's attacking players. But I think the crucial thing is that Dortmund do have firepower up front. It does feel like everyone's kind of clicking into gear.
yeah.
Not just Chukwuemeka, but Brandt looked back to his old best. Adeyemi looked really good. I thought Maximilian Bayer looked really good. Guirassy came on and did well. And, we just talked about Jamie Gittins struggling for game time, but of course he did get a goal. Um, So it'll be really interesting to see how Dortmund do approach this Barcelona game because they're definitely very top heavy. But I suspect Gregor Kobel will probably be asked to pull off some other big saves in this tie because I can't imagine they'll be keeping any clean sheets.
Well, I mean, there's one thing. I'm just looking up the goal differential for Barcelona. I know they have the highest goal differential in La Liga with 54 goals plus, but just want to look up the defensive numbers here real quick because we all know Hansi Flick loves loves to play with the very high line, right? So what is their goal differential? Why does every side, Stefan, why does every side only show goal differential, actually not goals plus minus? Do you have the stat in front of you? What's the best defending team in the La
Uh,
Liga at the moment?
Probably could. Let me quickly check. Standings. They've conceded 29 goals this season. Real Madrid have conceded 31, Atletico Madrid
Oh, so wow, okay.
24. So
So
it's not
that's
bad.
not typical Hansi Flick football then. Because I remember that year at Bayern where they won the title, they conceded a lot of goals. It's just that
Hmm.
they just went guns blazing, right? And they got a huge goal differential and because they scored so many goals, I think they scored over 100 goals that year. My point being is that usually when you get Hansi Flick football, you get fireworks, right? And I mean, we saw that against Bayern. We saw it in the first game against Dortmund as well. And I think what's what I'm really looking forward to and what I'm really fascinated about is seeing Rafinha and Lewandowski against the Dortmund back line without Schlotterbeck. I think is going to be a really tricky proposition because Schlotterbeck has been better lately,
Hmm.
right? He was really good at the Nations League. He's been good for Dortmund. I mean, there's still questions about his defensive abilities, and I think Niko Kovac already had to deal with it in this game against Freiburg. I think a big reason why he went to a back three was because of the concern with Schlotterbeck, right? I mean, granted, he's done it before this season, but yeah, I think that is really where this game is going to be decided. Or we're going to see a crazy 6-6, 5, like 6-6 on aggregate or something like that. I mean, that wouldn't be out of this world either. But yeah, I mean, without Schlotterbeck, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how Niko Kovac is going to try to nullify Robert Lewandowski, Rafinha, and Lamine Yamal. I mean, that is an attacking line that is going to be very hard to contain.
Yeah, I mean the thing about Barcelona's defense is they've actually conceded 13 goals in 10 games in the Champions League this season, and that tie against Benfica was far from convincing by any means.
Hmm.
As you said, the game against Dortmund, which was a real kind of box to box bonanza, really. But they also drew with Atalanta. They lost to Monaco. Made a real kind of dog's dinner of the win over Red Star Belgrade as well. So they haven't been perfect in the Champions League this season. They've got a lot of firepower, which does kind of make up for it. And you're right, it'll be interesting to see how they do against Dortmund. Dortmund are a team who obviously seem to do better in the Champions League to a comical degree. They've got all their attacking players are kind of really kind of seemingly at the kind of peak of their powers, it would seem, I think. And they've got a defensive system which isn't perfect. But then you could probably make the same case for Barcelona, as you said. So it'll
Yeah.
hopefully be a very entertaining match or over the course of two legs, and we'll get a lot of goals. But hey, look, crazier things have happened, especially when it comes to Dortmund in the Champions League. So I would not be surprised if they do something here, and I would also be surprised if they cause an upset against Bayern Munich in the following Bundesliga game because it would just be the most Dortmund thing ever.
Well, yeah, we're going to have to talk some time in the preview show about that game this week because I think it's actually going to be a way more interesting tie than we think, especially with all the injuries that Bayern have, especially with those two teams playing in the Champions League as well. I think that's going to be a big one for, for the preview show this week, Stefan, because all of a sudden that's a really interesting fixture. And one that's, we can maybe briefly touch for 5 minutes on Leverkusen here because they are a team that just doesn't want to go away. I think they were horrendous against Heidenheim. It was probably their second worst performance because they were also really bad against Bielefeld. There's a game that Stefan and I recapped
Mm.
last week. And we both were kind of shocked on how bad they were. And then we had Dan on for the previous show, right, last week, and we kind of said that Heidenheim, if Leverkusen play like they played against Bielefeld against Heidenheim, they'd be in huge trouble. And if Leverkusen played like they played against Bielefeld, which was bad football, but they seem to have this ability come back to them now, where they just seem to be able to win games late again. We saw it against Stuttgart. We now saw it against Heidenheim. They are kind of grinding out results, and just keeping this title race alive. And then I had a reminder on my, because I keep a diary every day, and it's one of those diaries where you can see what you entered, like what you wrote down the year before, and it was yesterday, a year ago, that Leverkusen won the title. And we're now match day 28, and the title race, in my opinion, isn't decided yet. I think Bayern are gonna win it, but I think it's still open, and it's open because Leverkusen just doesn't want to go away.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Heidenheim should have won this game probably 3 or 4-0.
Yeah.
It should have been 2 or 3 goals up in the first half, to be perfectly honest with you. They cut through that Leverkusen defence time and time again. One shot hit the crossbar and then the opposite post. That's how close they came to scoring in this game. And yeah, there's two things here. There is that kind of aspect of Leverkusen having this kind of never say die attitude, or as we would say, the kind of mark of champions where they win when they play terribly. And we've seen Bayern do this for so many years, obviously in the Bundesliga, where they just kind of stink out a match for 90 minutes and then someone pops up with a winner. And it's a great moment for Buendia as well, who hasn't had the greatest kind of spell since he joined the club on loan in January. But I just think this Leverkusen team looks so tired. Whether it's in defence, whether it's up front, a lot of it can also be chalked up to the fact that they were so over-reliant on Florian Wirtz for much of the season, and with him out, things have just kind of fallen apart. But I've actually done a deep dive in my newsletter this week on Granit Xhaka and his stats and how he's kind of fallen apart this season, and it's staggering to me how he's played every single game in the Bundesliga this season without fail. He's played 97% of the available minutes for Leverkusen in the Bundesliga, and it's a 32-year-old guy who, like anyone, is obviously beginning to feel the effects of age. And Xabi Alonso is just so reluctant to kind of drop him out of games. He's got Alex Garcia, he's got Palacios, he's got Robert Andrich to an extent as well, although he played in central defence in this match. And Alonso is just so reluctant to just kind of drop Xhaka for these games. And he was actually interviewed in the kind of mix zone after the game, and the German press were basically quite upfront, like, you played pretty terribly there. And he was saying, he's like, yeah, well, this game and my Bielefeld game weren't great, because he did give away the ball right in front of the Leverkusen defence in the first half, or one of the chances for Heidenheim. And I think he really sums up this Leverkusen team quite well, actually. Not in the sense that the whole team's tired, but in the sense that Alonso is just so reluctant to change things. He's got a whole array of players that he could pick from, but he's sticking with his old guard. I think out of not stubbornness, but as I said in the newsletter, like, Xabi Alonso's greatest strength and his greatest weakness as a head coach or as a tactician is that he always has to be in control. And when things work really well, we get that Leverkusen team of last season where they dominated games, where they dominated Bayern in those kind of one-off matches. They did really well in Europe, obviously, getting to the Europa League final. They had a system that teams just couldn't combat. But we've got to this point now where the team obviously aren't doing as well as they did last season. Players are out injured. Star players have kind of fallen off form. But he's still reluctant to drop Granit Xhaka and just try something different. I suspect he won't drop him now between now and the end of the season. There's only 5 or 6 games left, and they'll probably just wait and see what happens. But yeah, Xhaka's been a huge drop off, and as a result, I think Leverkusen have dropped off, and they were so lucky to pick up 3 points in this game.
No, I agree with you. I think the one thing that gives him pause is that while Bayern is playing 2 really difficult Champions League games, Leverkusen can now just sit back, relax, turn on the TV, see what Bayern are doing, and then they're playing Union Berlin and St. Pauli, while Bayern is trying to get past Inter Milan, and also trying to beat first Dortmund, and then this Heidenheim team that's fighting for their lives, right? So that is the one thing where I'm kind of thinking, like, maybe now that they have essentially 2 weeks where they can just coach, rest, players like Granit Xhaka, the amount of games that he's been playing is staggering. Well, I that could be the difference maker. Before you know it, it's 3 points in the title race, and the more rested team will be all of a sudden Leverkusen, especially if Bayern get past Inter Milan. If big if now, so I think that will make things really interesting. Yeah,
Yeah. Do you know, just on that briefly before we do wrap up,
yeah,
if you do kind of look at the games that both teams have left to play, you could probably make a pretty strong argument that Leverkusen might have a slightly easier one. As
yeah.
you said, oh, sorry, I'm about to sneeze. As you said, they've got Union Berlin and St. Pauli, who, to be fair, are no slouches. They're both fighting for their lives. But then they've got, Augsburg at home, Freiburg away. Freiburg aren't very good against
Mhm.
top four sides, despite how well they've done this season. Then they've got Dortmund and Mainz, which, are tricky matches. But Bayern have, as you said, Dortmund, sorry, this weekend, which, as we said, their classic, or even though it's anything but these
Yeah,
days. Heidenheim away. Mainz, again, tricky. They play Mainz very soon. Obviously, Leverkusen playing them last day of the season, but by that point, we'll need to see RB Leipzig, who have the capacity to cause an upset. Gladbach, who were doing tremendously well until this weekend. Hoffenheim, and then they finish up on Hoffenheim as well. So, yeah, there's a lot of potential banana skins for both these teams to trip up on. But I think Bayern are probably juggling more things at this moment in time because, as you said, they've got that Champions League as well, and such an array of injuries, which Leverkusen do have their injuries, but not anywhere near the same extent.
here's my wild prediction for the end of the season before we wrap this up. Bayern Munich are going to win the title on the final day of the season on goal difference.
Wow, I think. I think they'll probably win it by like a good 3 points, but yeah, I think it'll be quite tight. I'd be amazed if Bayern went the rest of those league games without dropping points. So it
Thomas
just
Müller
depends.
winner. Thomas
It
Müller
depends. It
winner. The
just, it
final
just, it
day.
just, yeah. It just depends whether Leverkusen drop points too, and if that game against Heidenheim is anything to go by, then they definitely will drop points because they were absolutely useless.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's wrap this up. We be back for the Champions League games. Stefan, your newsletter is on Leverkusen this week, so I'm looking forward to that. Matt is going to have his usual newsletter, and I'm going to take a break from my pool time here in the desert and write a newsletter as well for Thursday. So yeah, usual slate of podcast and newsletter coming to you this week. And yeah, once again, congrats, Stefan. Welcome to Daddy Life. It's amazing. And we'll talk to you all soon again. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.